Hi guys, hello, welcome to my channel. Today is April 1st, so we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in March, which is quite a few. Let me grab my book stack. Here's all the books that I physically own that I read, but I also read a book on my Kindle. I got a couple from the library. We did a lot of reading in March, which I was actually really excited for because if you watched my last month's reading wrap up, February was a terrible reading month for me. I was basically in like a month-long reading slump. I think I ended up reading like a total of 5 books, but in March, we read, I think, 12. The first 2 books that I actually read in March, I'm not going to talk about in this video because I actually already talked about them in my February reading wrap-up because they were basically part of a series that I had been reading, Radiant Sin and Cruel Seduction, which are books 4 and 5 in the Dark Olympus series by Katie Robert. They're basically like spicy, smutty books, kind of centered around the gods, like Greek mythology. None of the gods actually have power. They're just kind of like normal humans in kind of like a mafia-esque style world. So good. And as of right now, I still have only read 1 through 5. When I had last left you off with this series, I had the 6th book that I placed on hold at my library, but somebody had it checked out and it was due on the 8th of last month of March, but whoever had it like kept it for a very long time because I did not get a notification that it was ready for me to pick up until a couple of days ago. So if you have a library book, please return them on time because sometimes people are waiting for them, which is also a reminder for myself because there's definitely been a couple of times where I've been a little late. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our actual first book that we can talk about for the month, which is Foxglove by Adeline Grace. This is essentially the sequel to Belladonna, so I'm not going to really talk too much about what this one is about, but as far as Belladonna goes, it's essentially kind of like, I feel like a lot of people describe Belladonna as being like a fantasy romance, but I really wouldn't consider it to be a fantasy romance, although there is kind of like the essence of a little bit of a potential romance between the main character Signa and Death. There really isn't any actual romance in that first novel. To me personally, it's kind of more of like a murder mystery. We have our main character Signa, who has kind of always had Death as a presence in her life, both physically as Death himself, but also her parents died when she was really young, and she's been kind of like hopping from family member to family member, and every time she gets to a new family, shortly after, that family member also passes, until she gets to the Hawthorns. Essentially, when she gets there, she finds out that the woman of the house, the wife, has passed away, and the daughter is also sick. So her and Death essentially team up to kind of like find out what has happened. It was just a really fun story, in my opinion. There is kind of like a little bit of like a paranormal, magical kind of element to it as well, and that does all kind of carry over into Foxglove, which kind of had a very similar vibe, like different story obviously, but still kind of like murder mystery vibe. Also, we got a new character, which is Fate, who is Death's brother, involved, and that definitely made it a lot more interesting. And again, there was like a little bit more of that like air of romance in this one than there was, I feel like, in the first one. So if you were kind of missing the romance in that first one, you get it a little bit more in this one. The only other thing that I have in my notes is basically that the ending, or like the couple of twists at the end, were definitely a little bit predictable. I kind of guessed everything like halfway through the story, but it was still so good, and it does definitely leave you off on a little bit of a cliffhanger, which makes me very excited for the next book. And very excitingly, that next book comes out, I think, at the end of this year, like August, September, or something like that. So only a few more months, and then I continue on with the story. The next book that I have is Hunt on Dark Water by Katie Roberts, which is right here. I don't physically own this. I picked this up from the library, and unfortunately, I did DNF it. I felt so confident going into this book because I had literally just binged the Dark Olympus series, also from the same author, and I just didn't jive with this one as much. I actually got pretty far into it. I got to page 229 out of 320, so I literally had like less than 100 pages, but it got to the point where, well, first off, I feel like the actual first half of the book and the whole buildup of the story was pretty good. I liked the characters enough, I liked the story enough, but it got to a point where it started not really going anywhere, or I just didn't like the direction it was going in. I honestly don't really remember. The only note that I have written down is I said it has cringy spice and dialogue. So I just remember I kind of was losing interest the farther I got into the book, and it just kind of got to this point where I probably would have been fine finishing the book, but I know that this book is going to be a series, and I just knew at a certain point that I had no interest in reading the next book, and I didn't want to finish the entire book and potentially risk a cliffhanger that would make me then read the next one, even though I really was not that interested in it, if that makes sense. From what I can remember, basically our main character is a witch. She is kind of like running from something and she ends up going into another dimension on accident, gets captured by some pirates, and had a really good, like, fun sounding plot. I just lost interest. So there's that one. Next up we have, I think, one of my favorite reads of the month, which was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I also checked this one out from the library, and I definitely want to purchase this one to add to my collection because I liked it so much. If you're unfamiliar with Ali Hazelwood, Bride is essentially her first like debut novel into kind of like the fantasy romance realm. She is typically just a romance writer, and the only other thing that I've really read from her is The Love Hypothesis, but I really enjoyed it. So I was really excited about the potential of her being in the fantasy romance realm, and it definitely did not disappoint. Hands down, gave this 5 stars, thoroughly enjoyed everything about it. It's basically a romance, kind of like a marriage of convenience slash like arranged marriage kind of situation between a vampire and a werewolf, and it was just so good. I will say that there were a couple of things when I first started reading it that I was like, oh no. For example, like the werewolf's blood being green. Why was that necessary? That just made it sound so cheesy at first. Like I read that and I was like, oh, this is not gonna be a good time. Also, the other thing that a lot of people kind of were uncomfortable with or thought was weird was the whole like knot situation, which I will say definitely was a little weird. And I read a lot of smut, I read a lot of spice, but that put it into a realm that did make me a little uncomfy. But it definitely didn't make me uncomfortable enough to not still give this book 5 stars. Like, loved this book. And I'm actually really excited because the end of the book kind of gave the opportunity for a sequel, I think. So I'm really crossing my fingers that there's going to be a second book because I want more Ali Hazelwood paranormal slash fantasy romance. The next book that I have is another one that I went into kind of hesitantly. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it, and that is Butcher and Blackbird, and this one I actually got on my Kindle. Another 5-star read. This one is essentially a rom-com romance between 2 serial killers, which is such a weird concept. This book overall just had like a surprisingly sweet kind of just vibe, and I absolutely loved it, like amidst all the crazy serial killer things. I do believe the beginning of this book has like a list of like trigger warnings and things like that, and there are certain things that a lot of people talk about, like the ice cream incident, and I think that's the main one. Honestly, totally didn't faze me. I don't know. I remember kind of like going into that book specifically thinking like, oh, I can't wait to get to the ice cream situation because everyone talks about it. And I literally almost just read past it without even recognizing that I was reading it. To me personally, it wasn't really that big of a deal. There were so many other things in there that were more shocking than the ice cream. But either way, so fun. It was a good time. I had a lot of fun reading this book. And I'm also very excited because this one is getting a sequel. It's called Leather and Lark. It's coming out very soon, I think like this month, and I will definitely be reading it like the second it comes out because I'm very excited for it. And then the next 2 books that I have are probably some of the most bittersweet reads that I have for this month. We have Reckless and Hopeless from the Chestnut Springs series, aka the 4th and final book in the Chestnut Springs series. I am literally so sad that this is over. I'm actually so sad about it that I've mentioned it in the last like 2 or 3 videos that I filmed. Devastated. If you have been on the fence about reading Chestnut Springs, try it out. I went into this so hesitantly, thinking that there's no way in the world I was going to care about a cowboy slash like small town romance. New favorite romance genre. But to go into more detail about these 2 in particular, so again we have the 4th book, which is Reckless. Also, by the way, all these books are by Elsie Silver. If you're unfamiliar with the Chestnut Springs series, essentially again they are kind of like small town cowboy-esque type of romances that kind of revolve around the Eaton brothers and people adjacent to them. So this one in particular is about Theo and Winter, who are adjacent people to the couple in the first book, Flawless. Essentially, Flawless is about Rhett, who is a bull rider, and Theo from this book is his kind of apprentice of sorts. He's also a bull rider. And Winter from this book is Summer from Flawless's sister, if that makes any sense. So basically this book is very tied to things that went on in the first book, especially where it comes to Winter, because there's like strain between the 2 sisters. So it was actually really nice to kind of get a follow-up to kind of the situation that happened in the first book, but then also kind of get more of a backstory on Winter herself, because as her name suggests, she does kind of have a cold, kind of icy personality, and it was nice to see like another side to her. But it was also really fun in general just with the romance, because Theo and Winter have very different personalities. The overall vibe of this one was just really, really sweet, and I kind of went into it honestly the most nervous about out of the entire series, because it does have a trope that I typically try to avoid, but it honestly just ended up adding to the sweetness of this book. Like, it just was so good. It was just so good. So there's that one. And then again, the last and final book in the Chestnut Springs series, we have Hopeless, and this one revolves around Bo Eaton, who is I think the youngest brother, if I remember correctly. When I first originally started this series after reading Flawless, this is the book that I was the most excited to read. I wanted more of Bo immediately. However, as the series progressed, I feel like I became like less and less excited about his story with each book that I read. And I'm not going to explain why, because I don't want to give any of like the plot away, but I went from like really excited for this one to kind of like, oh no, I hope I don't hate this. And let me tell you, I definitely did not hate it. This one was also, literally to no one's surprise, so good, so cute, so sweet. I freaking loved it. Bo Eaton is the town prince, a handsome military hero with a tortured past. Bailey is the outcast bartender, a shy girl from the wrong side of the tracks. He's 35, all man, she's 22, and all virgin. He's also her fiance. Correction, her fake fiance. So this obviously does have an age gap romance, but also we have one of my most beloved tropes, which is the fake dating trope. Any kind of like forced proximity type of trope are always my favorite, because I feel like they build tension the best. And also I will say the thing that I was worried about as far as Bo's character goes going into this one wasn't really a thing pretty much right off the bat. And I think that's everything that I have to say about this book and about Chestnut Springs. Again, I am so sad that that series is over for me, but I did actually just recently purchase the entirety of the Gold Rush series, which is within the same universe as the Chestnut Springs. And also too, her new series coming out, Wild Love, I think it is, or something like that, that's also within the same universe, so I will be reading all of it. Next up we have Bloody Heart by Sophie Lark, and this is the fourth book in the Brutal Birthrights series. And this is another series that I've been kind of like slowly picking my way through. And I'm gonna be honest, I have not been enjoying this one as much as the Chestnut Springs. Like, Chestnut Springs hits it out of the park every single time. These books have been a little touch and go. I really enjoyed the first book in the series, The Brutal Prince, but the second and third, Stolen Heir and Savage Lover, were not my favorite. So I was kind of like losing hope / like interest in the series a little bit, but this one has definitely kind of like reignited that interest, because I did enjoy this one quite a bit. And this series is very similar to the Chestnut Springs in the sense of it revolves around a specific family, but for the Brutal Birthright series, it's actually two families that you're following, the Gallows and the Griffins, which are basically rival mafia families. And each of these books does have like an illustration of both of the families, which I do reference while I'm reading. And this one in particular is about Dante, who is this guy. So essentially Dante is the oldest brother in the Gallo family, and he ends up accidentally kidnapping Simone. And they end up kind of having like a little bit of a fling that lasts like a few months long, but then they end up having to separate. Simone moves and they don't see each other for years and years and years, until Simone ends up coming back to the city that they all live in. And it says, after 9 years of ignoring Simone's perfect face on billboards and magazines, Dante thinks he's finally moved on, but then he sees her in the flesh. He hasn't forgotten, neither has she, and now fate has granted them a second chance to reconnect. So we also have a second chance romance in this one as well, which I think this is the first time I've ever read a second chance romance, and thoroughly enjoyed it. The next couple of books that I have are Haunting Adeline and Hunting Adeline, and I'm not going to really talk too much about these books because I did actually film a reading vlog for them. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the next video after this one, so once I upload that, I'll put it in the description of this one. But I did read Haunting Adeline, and as you can see, I am still kind of like in the middle of Hunting Adeline. These books are crazy. These are basically spicy and very dark romances. Basically, this dude, the Shadow, is stalking Adeline, and yeah, some crazy stuff happens in this book. Like, if I was her, I would have been absolutely terrified throughout this entire book. But also, aside from like the romance, if you can call it that, is a little bit of a murder mystery, which was unexpected and really fun. And as far as this one goes, I actually ended up liking this one more than Haunting Adeline, even though I will say this one is definitely a lot darker. That being said, I did not finish it yet because I've had a lot of issues, which I do talk about in the video very briefly, but I've been having a lot of like anxiety issues and things like that, and I feel like reading such dark content, although while I'm reading it, it doesn't really bother me. I think just like sitting there though for days upon days and hours upon hours of reading nothing but like sad things was just not putting me in a very good mental state. So I had to take a little bit of a break, but I will probably get back to this month, I'm hoping, because I was actually really enjoying it, like all things considered. And then last but not least, for our March reading wrap up, we have Red Rising and Golden Sun, which are the first and second book in the Red Rising trilogy. These books have been so freaking good. I went into this very hesitantly because I feel like that's like the theme of this month. Books that I'm nervous about but actually ended up really enjoying. I went into this series very hesitantly because it is a sci-fi series. Essentially, a lot of people describe it as being like a Hunger Games in space. And I'm gonna be honest, after reading this book, I don't really agree with that description. To me personally, it reminds me more of like a real life version of what's that club that they show in movies where they kind of like are different countries or whatever and they have to like figure out issues and things like that. It kind of reminds me more of that, but instead of like trying to figure out situations and work together, you're trying to take over everyone's territory. Also too, with it being like Hunger Games in space, the entire time I was reading this first book specifically, I kept forgetting that they were in space. This book, however, brings the space. But anyway, Kevin's been reading this series and he's been really enjoying it. So much so that the past couple of months at least, he's been like begging me to read this series so that we can like talk about it together. So I finally did, and I am so glad. I am so glad he pushed me to read this because this is so freaking good. I like this series way more than I ever thought I would. So good. My camera battery died, which I feel like has happened like every time I film now, so I think I need a new battery. But that aside, I don't remember what I was saying about these books. I think I'm just gonna wrap them up. Basically, this series is so good and I highly recommend. One tip that I do have for you though, if you do go into this series, get the first 3 like right off the bat, or at the very least, once you start this one, get the third one, because this second book ends off in craziness. So many things happened at the end of this book. So you're gonna want to immediately jump into the third one, which is exactly what I did. The writing for these books just is top notch. It flows really nicely. The author packs a lot of things into each book. Highly recommend Red Rising. But anyway, those are all of the books, the many books that I read in March. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite book of the month was. I was gonna let you know what mine is, but honestly, I don't know. I read too many good books this month. Literally, March was such a good reading month. This is definitely at the top. Butcher and Blackbird, Bride was definitely up there. This is definitely at the top. Foxglove was really fun, and even Haunting Adeline, even though I think my overall star rating is gonna be probably around like a 3.5. The reading process of this was actually really fun still, so that was a highlight of my month. Like, so many good books in March. And I really hope you guys had a good reading month as well. And with that, I think that's everything that I have to say. I hope you guys have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye!